What is good, everybody? Welcome back to another episode brought to you by the League FFB. We have kind of informally updated the rankings on some live streams this weekend after the conclusion of the NFL draft. But today, I want to give you guys a formal video of my top 10 wide receivers in this year's 2025 rookie class and how I would be drafting these players in my 2025 rookie drafts. So with that being said, I don't want to waste too much more time. Let's hop right into today's video and let's start talking about these wide receivers. All right, so we're going to work our way from 10 all the way up to number 1, working backwards to the top. And coming in at number 10 for me, it is going to be Jaylin Noel, who was drafted by the Houston Texans. Round 3, pick 79 was the draft capital. Now, we've talked about Jaylin Noel a lot this season, obviously coming out of Iowa State. He was a very solid prospect, but the draft capital didn't give us a ton to be super excited about. It was a little bit later than we thought he was actually going to go, but overall, I still feel fairly confident with Jaylin Noel, still cracking into my top 10. But when you look at this situation, the Houston Texans, they obviously feel like they have a need at wide receiver. Now, they addressed this multiple times in the NFL draft, and they added Christian Kirk this offseason as well. Now, obviously, they've been addressing this because they lost Stefon Diggs in free agency. Also, Tank Dell had a very bad injury that is likely going to sideline him for the majority of 2025, and I think that the draft pick of Jaylin Noel actually feels like a little bit more of a insurance policy for a guy like Tank Dell. At the end of the day, I think Noel is a player who we're going to have to be a little bit more patient on. Christian Kirk is probably going to be the guy who works that slot role in Houston for 2025, but over in 2026, maybe beyond, Jaylin Noel will have the opportunity to come in and capture it as a full-time player for the Houston Texans, and I think he may end up being the guy over Tank Dell. I think I'm getting a little bit more scared of Tank Dell. This just kind of tells me that they don't like what they've seen from a medical standpoint. So overall, Jaylin Noel, still a player I'm very excited about. You still like what you saw from a production standpoint in college, and like I said, coming in as my wide receiver 10, my 23rd overall player in my rankings, so I'm definitely comfortable using a late second round pick to draft him onto my Dynasty Fantasy Football teams. Now let's move on to my wide receiver 9. My wide receiver 9 is going to be Kyle Williams of the New England Patriots. Now, Kyle Williams, definitely a riser throughout the draft process for a lot of people. Early breakout age, checked a lot of the analytic boxes that you wanted to see from a prospect standpoint, and he goes round 3, pick 69 to the Patriots, like I said, so similar draft capital to Jaylin Noel. Now, overall, when you look at that New England Patriots offense, there really isn't a lot to get excited about from a wide receiver standpoint. They obviously signed Stefon Diggs, but he's still going to be recovering from that ACL injury. And outside of him, guys who failed last year in Jalen Polk, Javon Baker, Demario Douglas is still there, who's a good, not great type of wide receiver. There's really not a lot of guys there to get you super excited about. Some of the best additions that they've made this offseason outside of Stefon Diggs in that wide receiver room was Matt Collins of the Buffalo Bills. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of opportunity on the table for a guy like Kyle Williams right away. I think he can come in and immediately work his way into that wide receiver 2 role opposite Stefon Diggs. And if Stefon Diggs isn't happy, maybe he gets some immediate opportunity right away, and maybe he can capture it as the wide receiver 1 for Drake May moving forward. Now, they also added a running back in this draft class, so they are focusing on the offensive side of the ball. New coaching staff and Mike Vrabel. I think there's definitely going to be some things to get excited about. And unlike Jaylin Noel, where I said you have to be patient, I don't think you have to be patient with Kyle Williams. So if you're looking for a rookie prospect to come in and give you points right away, I think Kyle Williams definitely has a chance to do it. When it comes to my overall rankings, like I said, my wide receiver 9 in my rankings and my 22nd player overall, so I'm still comfortable using a late second round pick on Kyle Williams. I think the majority of the reason by that is because there's definitely some running backs that I like in this class, some tight ends that I like in this class. So that said, I definitely would consider using my late second round picks on a guy like Kyle Williams as a potential immediate impact player for my fantasy football teams, and Kyle Williams should be a high upside option in that late second round for you. Let's move on to my wide receiver 8. My wide receiver 8 is going to be Jack Bech, who was drafted round 2, pick 58 by the Las Vegas Raiders. Obviously a senior coming out of TCU. He was another riser in the draft process, starting at the Senior Bowl. You heard the story of Jack Bech, a lot of things that definitely are inspiring and make you want to root for the kid overall. But going to the Las Vegas Raiders here, this is another room that has a major lack of talent in that wide receiver room. Now, yes, they do have a guy in Jacoby Myers who everybody seems to like for PPR formats. I think he's a good, not great option as well. Obviously, Brock Bowers being the focal point of this offense, and they they drafted Ashton Genty in the first round, so they are going to want to establish the run. But Jack Bech is the type of player that I think can get on a good rapport with a guy like Geno Smith very early on in this offense, and I think that they're going to use him early and often as well. This is a player who does have some high upside. I think he has a high floor as well when it comes to terms of usage. And like I said, a lack of competition here in Las Vegas should have him ready to go pretty early on for the Las Vegas Raiders and for our fantasy football team. So if you're looking for a player in your rookie drafts that can be an immediate impact player, does have some of the underlying metrics that we want to see from a success standpoint, and maybe you're just looking for somebody good that you want to root for here in this rookie class, I think Jack Bech should be on your radar. I currently have him as my 20th overall player, so this is a player that I'm definitely comfortable using a mid-second round pick on in those rookie drafts if I have the opportunity to get him. And like I said, he does come in as my wide receiver 8 in this class, and somebody I'll be looking to draft onto my teams here later this week. Now let's move on to my wide receiver 7, and I think this is where we get into some potential big difference makers for fantasy football teams. This is going to be Tre Harris, coming out of Ole Miss, who was drafted round 2, pick 55 by the Los Angeles Chargers, and like I said, coming in as my wide receiver 7. Right now, when I look at my overall rankings, this is a player who I have as 17th overall. So again, another player that I'm definitely comfortable using a mid-second round pick on. But when you look at his profile in this Los Angeles Chargers offense, he looks like the perfect complementary piece to a guy like Ladd McConkey. Now, this is going to be a team that's going to use Tre Harris as a field stretcher, and I think he has the opportunity to grow into even more than just that for this team. But 6'3", 210 pounds, the usage profile in college, the next-gen stats check it off, the RAS score checks it off, everything that you want to see from an athleticism standpoint and a usage standpoint, you love to see it out of Tre Harris here, and this is going to be a good fit with a good coaching staff. And yes, this is a team that has Quentin Johnston on the roster, who did take a small step forward next year, and they did bring back Mike Williams, but overall, I think Tre Harris is a more talented player than both of those guys. So when you're looking at some opportunities for Tre Harris, I do believe that they will happen early. I think he's just going to earn those opportunities, and I do think that he can fill in for that Josh Palmer role, who did sign with the Buffalo Bills earlier this offseason and was a field stretcher for this offense. I think he can take over that immediately with room to grow. So yeah, I'm definitely comfortable with Tre Harris, and I have him as a player who's sneaking into that tier 5 for me, which are some of the best assets I think in this year's rookie draft. Basically tier 5 and above is everybody that I'm very comfortable drafting, knowing that they have some upside for my fantasy football teams. So he sneaks into that tier, and at his current cost, I'm definitely going to be looking to get him onto some of my teams this year. Moving on to my wide receiver 6, that's where I'm going to have Jayden Higgins, also out of Iowa State, but he goes to the Houston Texans as well, just like his teammate Jaylin Noel. The difference is Jayden Higgins was drafted round 2, pick 34, so damn near sneaks into the first round of the NFL draft. When it comes to that usage profile that I keep talking about, this is a player who had one of the better usage profiles of any wide receiver in this class. Now, he had a 34% receiving share, a 36% receiving yardage share. He also had 39% of the touchdown share from a receiving standpoint there at Iowa State, and a 37% dominator rating. These are dark green boxes in my analytic profile. Those are what we want to see from a usage standpoint, and not to mention this is also a big guy that's 6'4", 214 pounds, should complement Nico Collins very well. When I'm looking at the future of the Houston Texans, I kind of told you guys how I felt about that slot job and how Jaylin Noel should be able to take over Christian Kirk's job next year, not this year, but next year. I think Jayden Higgins should be the number 2 opposite a guy like Nico Collins this year, and he should complement Nico very well. They're going to be running those two guys on the outside with Christian Kirk as the temporary slot and Noel as the long-term slot, and this offense is going to be a lot better. They needed some wide receiver help. A lot of the guys that they had were older, left, or injured, and now they're going to be fixing that. They just need to fix this offensive line to give Stroud some time to get these guys the ball. But overall, I love Jayden Higgins right now, and I think he's a player that we could be drafting in the same type of breath, in the same conversation as some wide receivers like Luther Burden and Matthew Golden. In fact, I have Jayden Higgins in the same tier as Luther Burden, so he's a player that I'm very excited about, coming in as my 16th overall player, a player that I'm definitely willing to use an early second round pick on, and my wide receiver 6 overall. Now, getting into my top 5 wide receivers, this is where we're going to talk about Luther Burden III, who goes to the Chicago Bears in the second round, pick 39 of the NFL draft. Luther Burden was a player that I was excited about in the pre-draft process. Obviously, a lot of the conversations about Burden was the weird usage in 2024 and how the 2023 tape was much better than what we saw last season. Overall, from a usage standpoint, in that 2023 season, just like Jayden Higgins, dark green boxes across the board. I think he was a better prospect on tape than Jayden Higgins. I think analytically, he's a little bit of a better prospect than Jayden Higgins as well. Now, you put him here where Ben Johnson uses his second round pick to go get Luther Burden and bring him into this wide receiver room. I think Luther Burden should step into that slot role for Ben Johnson with Roman Rome Odunze and DJ Moore on the outsides. Is he going to be used like an Amon-Ra St. Brown, who he does actually kind of profile as when you look at a prospect profile? I'm not necessarily sure that's the route that I want to go. I know a lot of people have kind of talked about that, especially with the link to Ben Johnson, but I do think that this is a player who is going to get some touches. I do think that this regime did make a statement by drafting him as their wide receiver. Obviously, they didn't have any of these wide receivers that they drafted last year. This is the first pick that they make in that wide receiver room, and I do think that long term, this is a player who can grow into a larger role. I think when it comes to drafting players, we need to look at offensive situations over generic landing spots, and I think an offensive situation with Ben Johnson calling the plays and this team overall, I'm going to bet on Luther Burden. I know, like I said, Jayden Higgins should have some opportunities ahead of him before Luther Burden maybe does, but I do trust the talent of Luther Burden. He comes in as my wide receiver 5, like I said, my 15th player overall in my rankings, and a player that I'm going to be using an early second round pick on to draft into my Dynasty Fantasy Football rosters. Going to wide receiver 4, that's going to take us to Matthew Golden of the Green Bay Packers. Now, he was drafted in the first round of the NFL draft. They used pick 23 on him, and he's a player that I wasn't as high on in the pre-draft process. We did kind of expect him to get first round draft capital, but I think the Green Bay Packers is a little bit of a better landing spot than I had imagined for him to go. Now, this does still have a room of crowded wide receivers where you do have guys like Jayden Reed who are still going to be involved, Romeo Doubs who are still going to be involved, and a whole bunch of other guys. They drafted another wide receiver in this draft. They obviously have Christian Watson and Dontavion Wicks. There's a lot of guys here. Tucker Kraft, XYZ. You guys know the list. There's a ton of people. At the end of the day, Matthew Golden is picked in the first round, the first wide receiver to be drafted in the first round by the Green Bay Packers since 2002. I think right now he's a player that you have to bet on in this Green Bay offense and hope that they get him involved. I'm still not necessarily diving too high on Matthew Golden. I have him right now as my 13th overall player in my rookie drafts, but in that tier 4 above Luther Burden and Jayden Higgins. So if you want to use a late first round pick, maybe an early second round pick on Matthew Golden, that's where I'm comfortable taking him. The analytic profile isn't the best, and I think that's the main reason why I haven't been super excited about Matthew Golden, but the tape is pretty decent. But at the end of the day, when you're looking at hit rates, you want to target those first round wide receivers, and that's what Matthew Golden is. So I'm definitely comfortable taking him with that late first, that early second, like I said, here as my wide receiver 4 over Luther Burden, even though I had Burden above him in the pre-draft process. Now that the NFL draft is over. Moving on to my wide receiver 3 in this class. This is going to be a wide receiver that's in a tier of his own at the moment. I do have Emeka Egbuka of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and the initial draft pick of Egbuka to Tampa Bay did give me some pause, did give me some worry, but after I've sat on it a little bit longer, I'm feeling a little bit more comfortable about Egbuka here in Tampa Bay. He was drafted round 1, pick 19, so we got that first round top 20 type of draft capital from Egbuka, and this is a player that I was in love with in the pre-draft process. I think he does everything well as a receiver. There really isn't anything that he can't do as a wide receiver, and overall, this is a player who performed at one of the best wide receiver universities in college football with guys like Marvin Harrison, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, you name the list, Jeremiah Smith, all of these guys on his team. Egbuka still produced amongst these options there at Ohio State, so he's a player that is battle tested in my opinion when it comes to depth charts. I'm going to bet on that type of player. Now, obviously, Chris Godwin returning from an injury, maybe he's not fully healthy at the moment. I think this is a player who can step over Jaylen McMillan, who did have a breakout last year. A lot of people like Jaylen McMillan, but I think Egbuka is a little bit more talented than him, and Mike Evans getting a little bit older as well. This is a player we're going to be patient on. He may not get the day one opportunities. He may not even be fantasy football relevant for the first month or two of the NFL season, but once Egbuka gets on the field, he is going to be a player that I think is going to be fantasy football relevant, and I think he's one of the best wide receivers in this class still, so that's why he's coming in for me as my wide receiver 3, and I have him up in my tier 2 of players as the 7th overall player, so I'm using a mid first round pick on Emeka Egbuka still, despite the landing spot in the NFL draft, and he's one of the few players that I wish I could have on every single Dynasty Fantasy Football team. You're just going to have to be patient, so make sure if you draft him, you have the patience to deal with it. At the end of the day, though, Egbuka, my wide receiver 3. Now, coming in at wide receiver 2, this is where I'm going to put Tetairoa McMillan of the Carolina Panthers, top 10 draft capital. I don't need to talk too much about Tet. I have pumped him up all offseason so far. I've talked about how he had been my wide receiver 1 a lot through the pre-draft process. I loved Tet McMillan early on in his college career. He's been a top performer for a long time. The usage is exactly what you want to see. The analytics profile, exactly what you want to see. And yeah, top 10 draft capital, exactly what you want to see. When you put him here in Carolina, this is a team that's going to be building around Bryce Young. Obviously, they're going to be trying to help him develop, and Ted McMillan is going to be the big part in that next step forward for Bryce Young. He's going to play outside. He's a different type of wide receiver than anybody that they have in that offense right now. I think he's going to be the true alpha wide receiver one in this offense moving forward, and I think this is a player who can come in and see 100+ targets year one for the Panthers in a Dave Canales offense that was a better offensive situation in the back half of last year. The only thing is, we hope that Bryce Young continues to develop. If that was just a flash in the pan, maybe you don't love the quarterback situation, but I do trust that Dave Canales is going to get this guy the ball the same way that he had Mike Evans producing in years past, the same way that he had Chris Godwin producing in years past, and all of these other wide receivers that he's worked with. Ted McMillan should be a fantastic option for Dynasty Fantasy Football teams, a wide receiver 2 overall, and a player that I'm drafting in the top 5 of rookie drafts. In fact, I have him 4th overall, ahead of Omarion Hampton right now in my personal rankings, and this is a player that you can comfortably use an early first-round pick on here in the next couple of days and be very happy about the player that you just drafted there in the early first round. And now coming in at wide receiver 1, last but not least, it's going to be Travis Hunter of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Obviously, Travis Hunter, he was a very polarizing player throughout the pre-draft process. I got a lot of clarity on Travis Hunter with this landing spot here in Jacksonville. He is up there with Ted McMillan as one of the most talented wide receiver prospects in this year's class. In fact, a lot of people might tell you that Travis Hunter is more talented as a wide receiver. I think they're more 1A, 1B. But when you had him get drafted by the Jacksonville Jaguars, who took a very bold swing to move up to the 2nd pick overall in the NFL draft, trade a future first-round pick, and get him on this roster, Liam Cohen and James Gladstone made sure to tell us we're starting him on offense first, and then we'll bring the defense in slowly but surely over time. This is a player that they value as a wide receiver first, a cornerback second, despite the need for corner on this roster, and he's going to complement a guy like Brian Thomas Jr. very, very well. I think Travis Hunter, super talented. We don't need to talk too much more about the talent overall. You guys know it when you have a player that can play both sides of the ball and do it so highly at that type of level, but this is a player who can run every route. He can play outside, he can play in the slot. You have one of the sharper offensive minds in Liam Cohen here scheming plays for him. I think there's a lot to be excited about when it comes to Travis Hunter, and that is why he has officially jumped Ted McMillan, who was my wide receiver 1 pre-draft process. But when you account for the landing spot and the draft capital that they used to move up and make this guy a part of their offense, it just gives you a little bit more confidence overall in Travis Hunter. So I got the clarity that I needed, and that's why Travis Hunter comes in as my wide receiver 1, my 3rd player overall in my rankings, and a player you're going to be using a top 3 dynasty rookie pick on in your rookie drafts to make sure you get him on your fantasy football teams and hopefully be the guy to help you go win a championship. But there you have it, folks. That is my updated formal top 10 rookie wide receiver rankings now that the NFL draft is over. I'm going to be doing the same type of video like this, but for the running backs here on Wednesday, and then on Friday we're going to be talking about some taxi squad players you can potentially pick up off of the waiver wire once your rookie drafts are over. Make sure you guys are subscribed to this channel, that way you don't miss any of that future content. Also, if you liked today's video, you found something informative, entertaining, actionable, anything else, you just want to support the channel, hit the like button for me. And last but not least, make sure you go join our Discord. We do have a free Discord linked in the description, helping you guys with your rookie drafts, your dynasty fantasy football teams, trade advice, all of that stuff in there. There's 370 plus people I think in there right now that just want to talk some fantasy football. So like I said, it's free to join, no risk. Go join them. Let's talk some fantasy football and come join this community here at the League FFB. But with all of that out of the way, I have nothing else for you guys today. I will see you on our next episode. Until then, peace out.